The Reform conference was dazzling and baffling in equal measure, attendees say. But among the positively Trumpian razzmatazz, there were some serious warning shots fired at the Labour government and telling indicators of how Reform see their own chances in the next general election. As you'd expect, the new Statesman's Will Lloyd and Nicholas Harris were there, and they join me now. Hello, gentlemen.
Hello, Hannah.
Hello. Well, we've all been to plenty of party conferences. They're typically fairly dry, predictable, appalling food. How did this compare?
Well, let me take you back to this time last year when Reform had their conference in Birmingham in the same place. Much smaller room, 80,000 members, no corporate sponsorship that you could see, not many journalists there. And in fact, it was still a little bit higgledy-piggledy. I was introduced to their head of vetting within 5 minutes of entering that conference, who turned out to be someone who had been sacked as a candidate in the 2024 general election for Reform because they'd written an essay which sort of lightly praised Hitler. And then Reform
Just lightly, though.
Just lightly. And then admired him for some of his psychology.
He liked animals as well.
He loved his dogs. And so, yeah, it was still a little bit unprofessional. What did Farage say at that conference? He surprised a lot of people by saying, I want to be like the Lib Dems. I want to take local government really seriously. I want branches in every region of the country. I want to expand this party. Where are we a year later? Where were we this year? Well, Reform has 240,000 members. It has either full or partial control of 12 councils. It has, as Nick points out in a very good piece he's written for the New Statesman website this morning, it has a broadsheet newspaper in the Telegraph, has a tabloid newspaper in the Daily Express, and it has its own TV channel, GB News. And it now has the backing of a sort of cadre of intellectuals, people like James Orr, David Starkey, Matthew Goodwin. Matthew Goodwin, who at 11 a.m. at one of the Fringe events came out and said something that might have been more appropriate, sort of, on the front lines of a war somewhere. He said, I'm Matt Goodwin and I want my country back, in like the booming voice. And I think Nick and I sort of walked through the conference. We spoke to people. And yes, there was a smoke machine. And yes, there was glitz and glamour of a sort. But no, if you're on the left, if you're in this Labour government, you need to take this. And I think some people around Starmer do. You need to take this deadly seriously, because this is the British right now. It's not the Conservative Party. This is where it is. This is where the energy is.
Let's unpick some of that, because you've made a lot of points. 240,000 members.
Mm-hmm. They crossed it over that threshold during the conference.
I mean, that's enormous, isn't it? I mean,
it's one of the largest political parties in Europe.
It's an amazing achievement, apart from anything else. How have they managed to do it?
They've done it like the old-fashioned way. Like one guy I spoke to talked about driving 30 miles 2 years ago to get to his local Reform branch, and then very proudly told me how now there's an even bigger one 2 miles down the road. I think he was from Telford in Shropshire, and so I think they've kind of done it like that. The left is always very good at talking about associative institutions and party structures and all these things that they are really terrible at doing in practice. Like Reform has got all that stuff, and I hesitate to use the word organic to describe how that stuff's come about, because obviously there's a lot of big money, donors, quite suspicious institutes with sort of anodyne-sounding names, kind of in the mix here, making this stuff happen. But as Will says, like you've got a kind of a party structure in the kind of like classic 20th century mold, where people are these are activists, they're everyday people. You ask them, why are you here? Like, when did you join? They talk about watching GB News for a couple of years, getting bored of yelling at the telly. You hear that quite a lot. And then it's, I've got to get up and do something. And they've basically been radicalised by kind of a weird mixture of, so immigration is the prevailing, force behind this stuff. And then the other stuff is the kind of things that like annoy you on your like drive home from work. So the first thing, this one woman called Val, who dyed her hair teal for the event, the first thing she mentioned when I asked her why she was there, she was talking about 20-mile-an-hour speed limits in Wales. So it's this kind of, it's like gripe politics plus this, pretty much national rebellion against.
I mean, I can empathise with Val on that one. We have 20 miles per hour where I live, and it's incredibly irritating.
It is slow, isn't it?
It's very slow. I don't blame Keir Starmer for that, but it's
objectively slow.
Yeah. Well, you're saying we need to take them seriously. I saw over the weekend the usual sort of taking the mick out of particularly some of the younger members that had attended. But we were talking amongst ourselves earlier, just saying, well, young people that attend any party conference are a bit odd.
Well, they're whack jobs, aren't they? Let's be honest.
Well,
Shouldn't they be smoking
normally-
cigarettes and drinking bottles of Jack Daniels, under a bench somewhere?
So
I mean,
that,
come on.
that's kind of sneering. And
Yeah.
I just, and sort of attempts to get at Nigel Farage as well. We've talked about the membership slightly, but has it evolved? Did you see this evolution of reform over the weekend at the conference, that it's harder to criticise it for being a one-man band? Were something to happen to Nigel Farage, would reform survive?
Well, then certainly the members I spoke to said it wasn't just about Farage for them. Certainly Farage brings an incredible brand of charisma. So Nick and I stumbled into the hangar where this was effectively being held on Saturday morning, a bit bleary-eyed, and there was a dais, a sort of stand set up of artificial grass and a podium on it, a sort of table on it, and there was Farage, waiting to greet Reform members who had spent £100 on a Reform football shirt with Farage's name on the back. And
How much?
£100.
Well, 40 for a shirt, but £100 if you wanted it signed, which is what this ceremony was. And it was announced on the tannoy, 11:45 a.m. Nigel's going to be signing shirts. Instant queue.
A human caterpillar formed.
Like a passport, like a winding, check-in queue. And these people are like anxious and awkward as they like go up to meet him, and sort of like they like breathlessly say like, "Thank you for everything you're doing, Nigel." And he gives, he says something to
He was
move
completely
on.
in his element as
Yeah.
well. He was glad handing, little smiles. The woman came through. She had she was Welsh. She had a big turquoise dragon with like Reform 2025 tattooed on her arm. Farage saw this and then sort of escorted her with the tattoo out to show the waiting press. All the snappers were there. Huge, big crocodile grin from Farage. She looked a bit dazed. Tattoo, Farage, cameras out. There's your news, everybody. And they made £10,000
From signed
that.
football
from
shirts.
a half an hour queue.
About an hour probably. But they absolutely just know their people, and you could see Farage's charisma in this moment. But
You can't say that at Labour or the Tories.
no.
can
And the sort of fun is there. But to answer to get back to your question, there was another sort of wall in this hangar where you had, I think, 10 or 11 of these Reform football shirts lined up.
It was 11. It was a full squad.
It was a full first 11, and it had all the, it had Tice, Lee Anderson, Layla Cunningham, Zia Youssef, Sarah Pochin, and this was Reform saying, no, this is not just a one-man band, we're a team of all talents. And all of these people, they either very, very frequent guests on GB News, or they have, in Lee Anderson's case, does he still have that show where he...
the pub one. The one that's set in the pub.
Lee Anderson's Real World.
That's it, Real World, yeah.
I believe it's called. And I think they're trying to, very conscious effort on the part of Reform UK to build up these characters. And these characters have access to a rolling news channel.
Well, let's come back to the role of GB News and the media and what have you. But I'm interested because both of the people you've mentioned, A, are both from Wales, but B, they're both women. And Will, you point out on your piece on today's New Statesman website that Reform is now doing better than the Labour Party in terms of support amongst women and working class members of the public. I mean, Labour will have their head in their hands about this.
This is from a report
Extraordinary.
that More in Common did just ahead of the conference, which looks at what is a Reform voter, and the argument that they make and the data they have suggests that the Reform voter is effectively the median Briton. So again, the temptation to say this is weird, this is baffling. Actually, this might be where the median person in Britain is at the moment. And I think that hasn't really sunk in Westminster. I think people still kind of discuss this as an aberration, or something's going to happen, a comet's going to fall out the sky and kill all the Reform dinosaurs. I'm very hesitant to buy into that analysis. And certainly there are plenty of women there, plenty of Gen X and above women who are breaking quite hard for Reform at the moment.
But is there, sorry Nick, I was going to say, I mean, is there that undertone of, there is still some nastiness there? I mean, we saw in the reshuffle, we've now got, Deputy Prime Minister David Lammy, who's obviously a British black man, Shabana Mahmood, is Muslim, also British, obviously. There have been some absolutely revolting comments, particularly online. I mean,
There absolutely have. I mean, and I guess it's quite hard to pin that on Reform exactly. I mean, they kind of, we talk about dog whistles. I mean, like the focus on Lammy in particular, in some of Lee Anderson's sort of strange stand-up routine of a speech, was obvious, let's say.
And Sadiq Khan as well, I think, is a huge hate
Mayor
figure.
Khan, as they always call him, which is a sort of like, I think it's meant to sort of mystify him in some way. But yes, I mean, it's definitely there. It's not quite as overt as some of the kind of more anonymous stuff that you might see on Twitter or X or whatever. But yeah, that is. I mean, I echo what Will said. Some of the stats in that polling is really interesting. I mean, Reform leads. They asked voters what they were looking forward to doing this summer. And Reform leads among people who were looking forward to having a barbecue, who were looking forward to watching the women's rugby, and who were looking forward to sitting in a pub garden. Like, it's
normal
so
stuff.
It's normie.
Just straight up and down cheddar cheese Britain. Like, it's just that. And if you speak to people, I mean, there's 10,000 people. Like, some of them are going to be normal, and some of them are. They're just kind of like people you'd meet, and they have, a lot of them have gone on a bit of a journey, clearly, and this has to do with media and GB News. They have a role in gathering these people together and sort of like turning them into activists, I think. But it's the difference between the 15% Reform got at the last election and the 31+% we're seeing them polling.
35 with a ceiling, according to More in Comment, of 49% of registered voters. That's how big they think Reform can get.
So there's still some way in this.
Yeah, there could be more. There could be more to come.
Nigel Farage brought his speech forward on Friday because of the resignation of Angela Rayner. Some attempts to sort of get him as well on this issue of stamp duty, and the Mirror were doing some digging, and they said, oh, well, you said you've bought a house, but actually your partner paid for it in Clacton. That's to avoid paying stamp duty, blah, blah, blah. Actually, there's no indication he's done anything wrong, and it's just in her name. But is he just untouchable, even if he had done something wrong? Is it a bit like sort of the Trump effect, where, I can walk down the street and grab a woman by the pussy? But
I don't think he's quite untouchable. I mean, Trump, there was that, and then there was the I can shoot someone on Fifth Avenue. I don't think Farage is quite at that point. I think the thing worth saying is that, Farage's sex life was on the front page of the News of the World in 2006. They splashed on, a Europe MEP, my night with Nige sort of thing. People kind of know what this guy is like, and they've kind of seen him, all from top to bottom, from head to tiptoe. And I think they don't go looking for propriety with him, and they sort of never have, and so therefore they don't really feel they need to look too closely at things like that, whatever that story turns into. I don't think certainly any of the people we were speaking to at the weekend will really care.
I think rage at politicians over their financial affairs is provoked by hypocrisy, not injustice. And maybe Farage, who can say about his his fifth home that he didn't buy, but you can't paint him as a hypocrite. That doesn't work. He's never said, I'm a decent man. He's never said, I'm a good guy. When he was on stage in February with Jordan Peterson at the art conference, and Jordan Peterson started, rambling on in his way about family values, Farage cut in and said, I'm no angel. He completely understands his persona. I thought one interesting thing about the evolution of that persona was a couple of things that people close to Farage said to me on Friday night, which was that he has accepted the inevitability of being Prime Minister, okay? And
he must be gutted about that, because it's the last thing he wants.
well, this is the interesting thing. This is a man who he had testicular cancer in his very early 20s. He nearly died in a plane crash, famously, when he was campaigning in 2010 general election. I think he's nearly died twice.
There was a car accident.
Oh, he got hit by a car. So he's nearly died 3 times. And he has
led a very unhealthy life.
Led an incredibly unhealthy life. And in 2010, UKIP polled, I think, 1.3% in that general election. And now he looks back on this, and he's in 2025. There's a deeply unpopular government, and he's at 35% with a 49% ceiling. And for the first time in his life, I think you could say that he's actually built an institution. His rage against the system has always brought things down. But Reform is actually now, as we've said, it looks like a very functioning entity. And the interesting thing that people said to me about him who work with him every day is they felt that he was more risk averse, more grandfatherly, more statesman-like. It's very interesting. They sort of see him as a much more serious figure than he was before. How do you bring him down? I mean, that is the question now facing Labour. How do you get at this figure?
But do you get the sense then that now that it might be dawning on him that actually it's not that ridiculous that he could be Prime Minister, is he quietly terrified?
You do hear like talk of that he I think he sees himself slightly as like he's kind of strapped into this like train now, and it's probably a good idea for him to accept maybe not the inevitability, but the serious chance that he's going to have to do something with it, because you can't back out. Like you're leading the most popular party in the country. And these people have kind of got a lot of hope riding on his capacity to like actually change Britain. I think one thing that now that we're at this point where we're sort of accepting reform as part of the political firmament, there was a really interesting piece by Patrick Maguire, formerly of this parish, in the Times on Saturday, which we were talking about while we were there, about kind of the under-discussed intellectual life of Nigel Farage. And there's this kind of element to him which is very little understood, where he's very interested in history. He spent the whole of the summer reading quite an obscure book by Roy Jenkins about the machinations of Edwardian politics. He's very interested in the First World War. He's obsessed with Siegfried Sassoon's memoirs and Edmund Blunden's memoirs. He's kind of got this conception of English history and the way he fits into it, which draws a lot on 19th century radicals. And he's always compared himself to figures like William Cobbett and John Bright, these kind of great extra-parliamentary orators who kind of mobilised mass movements that probably changed, certainly 19th century Britain, more than straightforward voting and democracy did. And that's kind of what he's managed to do in the first, 25 years of this century. So I think as he now kind of starts to conceptualise himself in that, kingmaker mainstream role, that's kind of how we should start to regard him too, and take him a little bit more. There was that line about Trump, take him seriously, not literally. I think that maybe we'll have to start applying that to Farage as well now.
I mean, if you can't, I heard a serving cabinet minister recently describe Farage as stupid. Now, I think you could say many things about Farage. You could say that he's played on some of the worst xenophobic tendencies in the British public. You could say that his financial affairs have been very irregular. You could say that he's treated some of the women in his life absolutely appallingly. Is he stupid? If you think that, I looked at that cabinet minister and I thought you're going to lose your seat, actually, to reform. And there's a very good chance they will. Because you've got to take this more seriously. You've got to figure out what the source of the appeal is and somehow dampen it or offer something better. That's what Labour have to do.
Or they have to stop, the argument would be stop playing into the hands of reform and attempt to rally the left, which is also falling away from their other flank.
So let's talk about the wider machine that reform now have surrounding them, which seems to be fundamentally different to where we were sort of a year or so ago. The right-wing press you've mentioned, there's the Telegraph, the Express, the Telegraph, obviously, infamously, the Tory graph, that for them to sort of desert-ish the Conservatives.
It's a massive symbolic slash.
And be very much supportive of reform is huge. But let's start with GB News then. Would they accept, do you think, that they are a mouthpiece for reform?
I mean, I'm sure they wouldn't accept that, but the reality is they have Reform MPs hosting their programmes. I mean, even to look at, it's quite straightforward what's going on there.
The people I've spoken with privately at GB News, who aren't senior management but are involved in the channel in a significant way, do not have. Let's put it lightly. They do not have much respect for Kemi Badenoch or her leadership. And
how important do you think not just having reform politicians have their own shows, but how important do you think the channel is behind this boost? I
think, so there were two schools of thought when GB News was first set up. One was to take the piss out of it, which was quite easy when, the lights kept turning off.
Andrew Neil was funny.
It was a funny saga. It was
saga.
Strange to see bits of scenery literally collapsing on it. But the other one was to point out this Americanization of the UK media. The latter, I think, has got more credibility now, because it is a kind of novelty in UK television to see presenters who are MPs are talking directly down the lens of a camera and telling their viewers what they think on the issues of the day. They're like, we aren't really used to that sort of thing.
No,
I mean,
quite right.
when Farage testified in the United States last week, he was wearing a GB News pin, and he's close with the owner of GB News, Paul Marshall. Sat next to Paul Marshall at the one of the Spectator Awards ceremony last year. It is probably one of the most significant things happening in British media in our lifetimes, I think. I mean, it's a channel that does put on left-wing views, but I think how are the left-wing views treated? I believe in Lee Anderson's Real World, which occurs in a pub. Lee speaks to a right-winger, and then a left-winger is sort of placed,
I think
very far away.
They are left in the corner.
No, they're left in the corner.
They're kind of in like a vanishing point in the corner of the pub, and they can't really hear them. And then.
But it's not, at the beginning when GB News first launched, lots of journalists, maybe politicians, would sort of unsaid boycott it, but that isn't the case now.
Well, look at its viewing figures. You can't boycott it. No. You can't ignore it. I was speaking to someone who is part of the team writing Starmer's speech for Labour conference, and they said, we need this. We need something like GB News. We're being completely outgunned here. And, the air war, the propaganda war that is going on in this country at the moment is dominated by, for journalists, by X. But Elon Musk has completely ripped that up and changed it. It's far more right-wing now, beyond right-wing, And what is the left equivalent of that? What is the left equivalent of all these websites and magazines that have popped up, support effectively right-wing or far-right sort of vehicles in the last few years? Nothing.
Do they have the intellectual backbone underpinning them, though? Where are the ideas coming from? I mean, you did your absolutely wonderful impression of Matt Goodwin earlier, but I'm not sure the majority
They've got
of the country
greater
was
intellectual
seeing
firepower than Matt
Yeah,
Goodwin.
okay.
I can assure you that, whether that's a good or bad thing. I mean, so one of the more interesting fringe events.
Also a GB News presenter.
Also GB News presenter.
And incredibly popular on the floor. I mean, people were flocking to him.
But yeah, one of the more interesting fringe events I went to was a conversation between Jacob Rees-Mogg and Dr. David Starkey. One time, probably second only to Simon Sharma in the kind of TV Don league table. But
you're quite reminiscent of him, Nick.
I'm quite reminiscent of him. To hear or to look at.
I'm joking.
Starkey.
I don't have horn rim
This is wild hair.
I don't know what to do with that, but I definitely don't agree with him because Starkey has, since his cancellation during the days of BLM, where he said that slavery couldn't be a genocide because there were too many damn blacks around the place. He has gone on a major journey. He was always a conservative historian and commentator. He's always written about constitutional history from a kind of conservative perspective. But he has since, on this YouTube channel that he's set up, which I think is called David Starkey Talks, and now he's taking this on the road, this kind of thesis that he's developed, which is a kind of analysis of British legal history since 1997. And this has become incredibly influential, not only within reform, but among figures like Rupert Lowe.
And think tankers as well.
I was going to ask about think tanks, though, because you've seen, if you take Policy Exchange, for example, obviously very much historically a think tank of the Conservative Party. The direction that's gone-ish, really, in recent, since Labour's election, is to kind of go that blue Labour route rather than reform, isn't it?
I think there are people in the sort of Conservative firmament, particularly older ones, who will just finding this very, very difficult to accept what's happened. I personally think the tipping point has been reached. I think that reform that is the right now. That's the centre of gravity. You can see it in the way they're attracting young people. You can see it in all kinds of different ways. But there's a generation of people who grew up thinking of Farage as this joker, who just cannot accept that the world has changed.
And they're also very associated with the leadership of Kemi Badenoch.
They're associated with the leadership of Kemi. They're associated with figures of the last 14 years of Conservative government, and they're going to find it. It's as much of a nightmare for them as it is for people on the left. What's happening?
Were there any other sort of signs that you guys picked up in Birmingham that it's not just the media and the public that are really starting to get their heads around the fact that there could be a reform government? I mean, what about business? sponsorship, kind of things like that.
The business side of things was quite interesting because, like, on the one hand, you had not just one but two stands for gold bullion sales, and a man who told me and Will that France was about to go to the next. It's going to be the next Greece. We were told. So, like, get your money in gold.
It's not looking
now.
good today.
And there was a picture. No, it's not. But they had a picture of Farage on their branding. He's holding up this like gold bullion, like this coin.
Pure
like,
Trump.
This is
it's pure Trump.
bizarre. But then on the other side of the room, you've got the Heathrow Lounge, and then you've got this JCB Pothole Pro, which I think is probably the most patriotic engine in the country. Like fixing our roads. And though the man at the stand was very keen to assure me that they retained an interest in all political parties, that engine squatting there just before you walk towards the main stage is so symbolic, because that's part of the empire of Anthony Bamford, the JCB tycoon, and historically one of the biggest donors to the Conservative Party.
Well, yeah, because we saw Boris, didn't we, smashing his way through.
And David Cameron, even before he became Prime Minister, was flown to India by JCB to visit their big factory over there. Bamfords have a multi-generational kind of stake in Conservative politics in this country. And again, that is a warning shot to the Conservative Party. This money can, possibly will move if they don't sort themselves out. I thought, for me though, I mean, I if I sound like I'm being boosterish, I would say that it's taking them seriously, but also thinking about what is actually going to happen, say they do win. There was a very interesting moment when Michael Gove was on stage with Zia Youssef. Zia Youssef, who is now the head of policy for reform, gave this kind of incredibly like arrogant display of like how easy politics is. He's a businessman. He thinks it can just be like this. He just didn't seem to have any kind of clue of what's going to come at them in Westminster and what it's actually like. And Gove asked him a very good question, which was, you've said that you're going to keep the triple lock, you're going to bring back winter fuel payments, and you're going to abolish the 2-child benefit cap. I mean, economically, that is nonsensical. It makes no sense. If you look at Reform voters, they're very, very united on cultural issues. They're completely split on economics. I have no idea what Richard Tice and Lee Anderson talk about when they talk about the economy.
I don't think they talk about the deficit, do they?
Yeah, and so
fiscal rules.
No,
and so Farage was talking about an election in 2027. There is just a hole where this thinking should be. Zia Youssef didn't have an answer to that question, and this could be an absolute disaster.
That's going to be one of the interesting things to watch, is whether like appeals to arithmetic, to kind of euphemize slightly, actually have any cut through the British public anymore. Because George Osborne won 2 elections with appeals to arithmetic and obsessing about the deficit, and then we had Brexit, where the lesson was that you can't just but like use economic arguments to convince people. This is going to be a really serious test of whether like vibes can win an election, because none of this adds up. There's nothing there. They don't like the only real policy that they kind of that they trumpet from the main stage is on migration. Like there is no political economy of reform. There is no thinking.
Well, let's end on this one then, guys, because you're both in agreement. Will, you said they can't answer any of these questions about economy. Nick, you're saying there's nothing there. So how did they see? What do they see as their path to power?
The path to power, I think structurally, they're kind of going in these baby steps. So they've got the membership now, they've got the regional branches, they've got those first local election victories in the council. They're now getting ready for 2026, and there's another round of council elections. There's the Welsh election and the Scottish election. So I think at the moment they're preparing. It's all kind of groundwork laying. In terms of path to power, like, I don't know what that next election campaign is going to look like when they publish some kind of manifesto, and it will actually be under the kind of scrutiny that no UKIP manifesto has ever been under. It will be interesting to see whether costings can defeat Farage, because that will be that.
Well,
and
it
that,
didn't
in a way,
defeat Labour, because to be fair, in the last general election campaign, all the parties were lying, weren't they?
Well, about tax.
Yeah, you can have the IFS stand up and go, none of this makes sense, and no one took any notice.
That is the crumb of hope, I think, for Labour in some of this. Is that I can't remember which pollster it was, but I saw some polling this morning that if you put Labour up against Farage, they still do have like a lead on credibility, and people trust them to kind of keep the show on the road a bit better. If the next election, it won't be socialism v barbarism. It might be like anarchy versus stability, or some kind of.
Well, the question that really that Farage has made the summer be about politically was, is Britain broken or not? I think, if you look at surveys of public opinion, the public is on his side. They do think the country is broken. Speak to people in Labour and they're trying to work out how to say the country isn't sort of broken, it's kind of okay, but give us a bit more time. That's not good terrain for Labour to fight on at the moment. I think if the country is pretty pissed, it's pretty angry, actually. Lots and lots of people. That anger is unevenly distributed. Walk through Hampstead, it's still looking pretty good. Inner city Birmingham, not looking so hot.